Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sumer Sports Show. I am Parker Fleming, filling in once again for Eric Eager and Thomas Dimitrov, who are off in Indianapolis doing all sorts of various combine activities, showing off the very cool tools that Sumer Sports has for NFL teams. And so we're here talking about the combine. I am joined today by Shawn, who is new to Sumer Sports, and we'll get the introduction with him. I'm not with Tej because I want to shout him out. He's honorable mention at the Big Data Bowl. He is also in Indianapolis doing all sorts of sports stuff, showing off his awesome projects. And frankly, given his career and his history at the Data Bowl, taking a little bit of a victory lap. So shout out to Tej for not being here for a very good reason today. But got Shawn on. We are going to talk about all things combine, get into a lot of fun stuff. But first, Shawn, how are you, man?
Parker, I'm doing great. A few weeks ago, I was just a full-time lawyer who really loved scheme, wrote about it, talked about it. And yeah, I'm so excited to be the director of communications for Sumer Sports. Still follow me on Twitter at Syed Schemes, but a lot of fun projects that we have going on at Sumer that just in my first few weeks that I've been able to see that as a real scheme forward first guy, I'm extremely excited about them. And the way to kind of combine scheme and analytics it's been really cool to see so far.
Yeah, so let's start there. I think let's talk about your background in football before we get into some other stuff, and get into what you're doing at Sumer and Combine and all the fun stuff we want to talk about. What's your background in football? What are you kind of your quote unquote biases about how you think about football, and kind of how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so I got lucky to grow up playing football. My oldest brother, he ended up playing in college, and he was an assistant on a team that ran kind of a no-huddle spread offense, and actually came back in my senior year. He coached me, so really kind of took me through and taught me a lot of learning defensive fronts, how a quarterback should go through, understand, and call, hey, this is what the play that we really need to get into. And really ever since then, I'm just so in love with the kind of high-level schematic aspects of it. It makes sense why the Twitter is Syed Schemes. I think that philosophy in general for so many different things is important, and seeing the trends in the league has been really fun to track over just years and years and years, where you see the different players, they change, the coaches that come in, the different kind of schematic trees that take hold. So I would say my bias is I'm a film guy first and foremost. I do trust the data. I'm not an anti-analytics person is what I would say, but certainly like when Tej sends us a graph or something, one of my first thoughts is, hey, I'm not sure how that kind of feels, but I'm definitely someone who is ready to check my own biases, because they are one pro player, right? I want all these players to kind of be put in the best position then to succeed, and pro fun, right? I think that we all love football so much and want to see different fun aspects of it, and it's just different ways to kind of get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you and I interacted on Twitter for the first time. I think you shared some playbooks and have shared some film with me. So that's been fun to get some of those resources and get into the film side of things from a coming from a nerd background myself. Tell us about, just again, broad strokes. We're working on a lot of things, but you're new to Sumer Sports, director of communications. What does that entail for you now and going forward?
Yeah, so on the internal side, there's a lot of our fun products that the really smart guys, like people like you, have created. It's really being able to communicate that and finding the bridge really for teams and making sure that they understand, hey, look, this is not something that you need to be afraid of, right? These are great tools that are taking into account so many different aspects of football, and being able to understand, making sure everyone, communicating directly, I think, is the job of a director of communications. And then on the outside, of course, during the year, I'll still be able to do some of that writing that I really fallen in love with over the past few years, being able to continue to break down film and kind of see the different trends of the NFL, and then see maybe how that should impact how teams build their rosters.
Awesome. Yeah, a lot of cool stuff we're working on, and it's cool to see you interact with, like stuff like Tej and Eric and I are writing, and how we can put all that forward and challenge our ideas and make some really exciting football content. That's a lot of fun. All right, let's move into talking about some NFL Combine stuff. Let's talk about some real football stuff. When you and I planned this show, we kind of had an open directive to talk about the Combine, but also whatever we're interested in. So I think with some of the stuff we've prepped is going to be pretty interesting as to our own perspective on the Combine, and Shawn, specifically your perspective on the Combine. So the first thing I think I want to talk about is kind of zooming out. Because the Combine, the purpose of it, right? We're looking at athleticism. One, verified numbers, because there's a lot of incentives to report unverified numbers. But verified numbers, seeing guys in person, talking to them, getting to the personality interviews, seeing not only who's a good physical and athletic fit, but also maybe a mental and kind of vibe fit for your team as well. But it is, primarily a vehicle to ascertain the athletic quality of individuals, and that affects draft stock. I think we've seen some guys really, play themselves into and out of draft position historically in the combine. But as teams are approaching the combine, they really have some key guiding factors, I think, specifically about what they want out of teams, or what they want out of players and how they fit into kind of the modern NFL. So I think that the first thing we should talk about, Shawn, and I want to give you free reign here, is kind of these big overarching shifts in athleticism and the requirements of athletes in the NFL, whether that be schematic, whether that be the way the game's played, and how that's going to end up translating to what we look for in athletes. So that's kind of two parts. One, let's talk about the shifts. Then we'll talk about how that translates to what we look for in athletes at the NFL Combine.
Yeah, I think that one a good way to start for people, read Taja's most recent article on sumersports.com, our new website, really up and firing. But the overarching scheme movement, if you can consider it that, even if it's a small thing, has been for the last few years really, the continued increase of two high safeties, specifically before the snap. Right? I think this may have been the first year where two high safeties pre-snap actually overtook one high safeties pre-snap. And so that has a lot of implications for, one, what a defense looks like, how an offense responds to that, and then by virtue of all of that, right, how the different traits that we look for at the combine to kind of fill in those roles. I think that those two high safeties, really, you want to have a lot of versatility there because you can play with lighter boxes, right? You can only have 6 guys in the box and still fill the run with the 7th player, that safety coming from depth. So Deontay Lee from The Athletic, he wrote a really nice article when he was kind of talking about Brian Branch and thinking about at the college level, a lot of the times based on, the way the offenses run their RPOs, based on the spacing of the field being one thing, the nickel is up like the slot cornerback really for a lot of these defenses, especially in the Aranda system, in that Nick Saban tree, has to do so much where they're playing a similar role almost as the weak side safety in the NFL. So one of the easiest pro examples is, CJ or Chauncey Gardner-Johnson for the Eagles when he transitioned from the Saints to the Eagles. His last year in the Saints, super, super high amount of his snaps playing the slot, goes to Philly, really from that Fangio tree. He moves to safety and I think had a lot of success in that role. I think Jalen Petrie from Baylor, playing in that Aranda system, doing a lot of those different things, moving to safety in the NFL has been a really positive thing. And my assumption is that Brian Branch's projection is at safety. So understanding, okay, yes, things do trickle up, but at the same time, understanding, well, the position that this person plays at the college level has maybe not a full direct translation, but it makes more sense because of the way that NFL defenses now are using their safeties coming into the box and playing in the space more similar to the way the nickelback does in college. And then further from that, you're going to have linebackers that can be really, really fast. And these things, you've seen them in college for, I think, a lot longer because it seems like colleges, maybe they evolve a lot quicker where when you look at Georgia and Alabama now, like what does their interior 7 look or 6 look like now versus 5 years ago? It's a lot lighter. Right. So the things that are being asked of those players, maybe a little different, specifically, defensive ends, they're maybe kind of bumped in the, the tight front, especially in like Georgia's mint looks. And then the way that offenses kind of respond to a lot of the increase in too high, a quarterback with increased mobility, right? That's just such a backbreaker when anytime you're playing, split safety coverages. Of course, then quarterback mobility has so much positive across no matter what the defense is. And then having receivers that, again, I think Tej did a really good job of hammering this down in his article and one of his articles coming up too, spoiler alert, is yards after the catch is such a big thing because now defenses are going to put a huge ceiling over the offense, force you to check it down snap after snap. So if, you can get that Amon-Ra St. Brown guy, who he is really special, I think, in the slot, they've dug out a huge role for that specific skill set. And then now there's a bigger question of, well, how do we figure out who that player is at the draft? Now, me, Parker, I know my biases. It comes from grinding that film. Unfortunately, you can't grind every single player over an offseason. Hopefully, an NFL staff can really cover a lot of ground. But then the question comes in, okay, well, how do we find the different things within the combine to measure, is it the 3-cone? Is it the shuttle or something that can represent something that is more, football specific?
Yeah, and I think that's just like a beautiful kind of that's what I want the whole show today to be about. So I'm so glad we kind of got that overarching that idea of like in every facet of the game, there is this pressure, this action reaction of hey, we're going to go to too high. That's going to require more athleticism for our safeties. Our linebackers are going to have to be a little more flexible in pass coverage. And then on the opposite side, okay, we know that's happening. How do we run against a light box that can defend the run from a light box? And then how do we attack there? So I think the place I want to start is talking about safeties specifically there. I think it's so funny. Isaiah Simmons getting drafted 8th overall as like a Swiss Army knife, like a positionless defender. That was only in 2020. Like that was actually way more recent than I think it is, because that seemed like kind of the first one of this wave of these college players who could come plug in and be this kind of hybrid linebacker safety guy and play multiple positions, cover the run, cover the pass. Specifically about the combine, I thought this was really interesting. Kevin Cole did on his Unexpected Points newsletter, did a really interesting kind of methodology for correlation from drills in the combine to NFL success for specific players. He looked at the plus minus and how an individual's actual performance on field kind of related to this. And he found a really striking similarity that I think is kind of funny. Safeties and interior offensive linemen had similar profiles of what drills mattered. And that seems a little bit crazy, but it makes a lot of sense. It's going to be the size and it's going to be the shuttle, right? You adjust both of those for, the size and the speed, but I need a guy who can play physically and I need a guy who can move to the ball. And so you think about guards and centers and how much mobility there frees up your pass blocking schemes and your run blocking schemes, kind of in the same thing. The safety is that guy that the more versatile he is, the lighter a load you can put on your defense.
Yeah, I think
or on the rest of your defense.
Yeah, I always get concerned where one of the most recent examples I think is Hufanga from the 49ers, where I think at his pro day, he may have like tested his speed. I think it was outside the 4.6 range. I think that maybe with a few other factors, kind of increased the reasons that he fell a little bit. And then it's really, coaches, I think Mike Tomlin spoke about it a little bit on a podcast. I think it was last summer, but right when I evaluate a prospect, like I'm trying to point out, okay, well, this player can't do this. This player maybe doesn't have the best hands in this spot. Like coaches have such a huge role in being able to translate, well, this is what we saw at the combine, and of course, mainly what we saw on film to the game, right? So the way that Fonga's used for the 49ers, maybe, again, I mean, he's a world-class athlete, right? But if you consider, oh, well, his range maybe in one of the lower percentiles for safeties overall, the way he's used that's such a funny comparison kind of to interior offensive linemen, specifically because I think of tackles, in a lot of ways they're playing cornerback where defensive ends are playing receiver. So kind of maybe that interior, exterior skill set, but really incumbent on coaches to understand, hey, if this person is going to be someone who maybe the testing he doesn't test as well, maybe we have to turn to tracking data where we can use, Cooper Kupp, I think is a great example where I do think, there's a lot of stuff that he tested incredible at, but using tracking data to understand, well, this player is moving at really speeds that I think that the stopwatch or of course laser isn't really kind of getting in the same way.
Right. And I mean, certainly there's an intangible skill for a coach to be able to see a guy in person and know, hey, I know what I want to do with him. And I know that I can use him there. But I think that comes with a lot. Talk about the 49ers. And the first thing I think of is like identity. I think almost more than any team in the NFL on both sides of the ball, the 49ers have a very, very strong identity, a very, very defined role for every part. And that of course makes it a little easier for you to find guys and say, hey, I think I could put him in this role and make him succeed. That gets a little murkier, I think, when you move from these clearly defined positions, right? Like I know what I need out of a left tackle. I don't know that you or I could go pick, hey, who's going to be the best left tackle in the NFL based on the combine drills. But generally, I think the median fan can look at a left tackle over the course of some film and some drills and say, I think this one's good. I think this one's bad, right? That gets a little murkier when you move inside, for instance, with linebackers. Going back to that Kevin Cole research, he found that linebackers actually had the weakest signal for of any position for combine drills, meaning that combine drills had the least predictive power for how successful their NFL career was going to be for the position of linebacker. And I have one or two thoughts about why that might be the case, but being a film guy, you probably have a good intuition of why those athleticism drills might not translate super well for linebackers in the NFL.
Yeah, being a linebacker is, I think really every position on the NFL field is so hard. But being a linebacker, you're asked to do so many different things, and it really varies kind of what defensive structure you're in. Sometimes you have to play slower, right? You have to really have that kind of. It's hard. I think that actually Eric and Tej are working on a really cool paper, or have been working on a cool paper where it measures kind of how much linebackers bite on the run or things like that. But some linebackers have to do that, right? Like sometimes the defensive front literally has them to do two different things. They have to fill a gap, and then they have to be able to bust back into coverage, right? So to articulate, well, how does this linebacker feel when the play action is, right? Sometimes I think that is a little difficult to put a single number on. So where, there's this awesome clip, I think it was Devin White, where after he ran like a 640, he called his mom and he was crying because he knew that he just, he put a lot of money in his pocket. And so that skill set absolutely has value, but he also has such a great feel for the game, right? So it is hard, I think, especially when I talk to guys like you and Tej, it's hard for me to articulate, well, what do I need this linebacker to be able to do? It's really, it is an art to me, right? To have the understanding of, well, I need to fill this gap now. I think people that watched Hard Knocks from the Lions last year, you see Rodrigo, and that was a really cool, I think, articulation of, well, certain linebackers, sometimes they kind of just get it, right? Like they understand, especially now. And I think what we're going to see now more is, especially in the college level, where we have defenses that are, odd fronts, three down fronts, where your linebackers have to kind of stack off of one of your interior guys and kind of fall back and kind of feel the run. I think that's going to continue to trickle up, where, we don't have just gap fillers the same sort of way on defense, where sometimes we've accepted, we're going to be okay with this 2-yard run. We don't have to risk shooting a gap, missing the run, and then trying to get the -1. So to me, I think maybe that the real skill and the real beauty and art of being a linebacker is a, quote, feel thing, which is so hard to just kind of put a number next to. And that, I think, a better job or way to measure that, to my mind, is you watch them on film with a real understanding of, okay, well, this is what's actually being asked of this linebacker, right? They're not being asked to shoot the gap, right? And, there's more, especially with the Dave Aranda scheme, I think, and Jim Leonard continuing to push through college and, hopefully finding its way up to the NFL, though, of course, they take from each other. Linebackers filling from the second level, right? So you have so many different roles where it's not just, hey, this guy is, this guy's Patrick Willis, this guy's the Mike, and you have Navarro Bowman on the opposite. So it's a hard thing for me to articulate. I wish I had a better, we can put this number on it, but to me, it makes sense why, just strict athleticism, especially already amongst such top tier athletes, there's so much more to linebacker player than just that.
Yeah, and I think that like one of the biggest testaments to that is, anytime you can watch film that's like from the quarterback view, and you kind of watch the flow, especially in college, where some of those standout linebackers are really playing just a fascinating position with all the anticipation they have, and frankly, what's asked of them. Some of the guys are asked to, like, you think about Malcolm Rodriguez in college. Basically, the defense was Malcolm Rodriguez is going to figure out where the play is, set the angle, and then everyone's going to fall into place off of that. And so you just watch it, you think, oh. If you watch a guy miss a gap, you think, oh, he should have just filled in that gap. But if you watch that from kind of the quarterback view, you think, wow, that's actually way harder to do than just see the gap and go fill it. There's a lot more going on. There's kind of this flow. And I think that, yeah, the measure, like the tracking data is, I'm really optimistic about that. The ability to kind of quantify the range. You almost think about fielding zones in baseball. It's obviously a little more continuous, not as discrete as baseball is, but this idea of, I can kind of look at your reaction flow to certain different types of plays, and what you do in that play is probably more important than how fast you can run a 40-yard dash. Because as a linebacker, hopefully you're not having to run a 40-yard dash on the field very often. If you are, your defense is probably going wrong. I think about that and what you said about the art leads me to the other side of the ball, because, I mean, quarterbacks as +1 in the run game makes that just that much harder for defenses. The fact that Jalen Hurts can effectively, competently, and lethally run a triple option offense in the NFL has to just be absolutely frustrating for some of these defenses as they adapt to say, hey, we've got these guys who have this feel and they have this athleticism. how do we put them in a position to kind of defend these multiple layers of option offense that we're seeing kind of resurface in the NFL?
I do think also off of that, right, where we think of quarterbacks exactly as you put it, right, plus one of the run game. To me, the gravity of those quarterbacks and their impact is they have an impact when they just hand the ball off, right? Like they maybe a linebacker has to play a little bit slower, right? Or one of the coaching points all week is, hey, the way that we fit option, like the linebacker is going to have to kind of scrape over to the top. So I think that also allows different running backs to be able to succeed where, maybe you don't have to have that mauler in the same. Of course, I think that running backs and really I feel like a lot of positions the NFL now are getting quote smaller, not that they're shrinking by any means, but having more versatile skill sets. So really understanding, okay, a quarterback brings so much value to our team. One, of course, in the rookie contract and surplus value and things like that. But it really makes it an interesting decision when you're thinking of, all right, looking at the top quarterbacks. And to me, seeing now more often these quarterbacks, not that it's a requisite that they have to be able to move, but being able to kind of use your legs in any sort of way, really to one as a function to kind of get against pressure, right? Like to find ways to escape and not being someone who, hey, this guy bails out of the pocket, but being someone who, hey, we're going to go through our whole entire process. And sometimes, we need a bucket Anthony Richardson, right? Sometimes you're going to have to kind of call on that. And the way that impacts makes it harder on linebackers, makes the D line kind of take an extra second. Anything that increases the amount of time that a cornerback has to kind of cover, the safety has to cover for an extra second, that gives your wide receiver another chance. So I know that we funnel and think of our game so much through the eyes of or through the spot of a quarterback. And it's cool to see, okay, these guys who really can move in the pocket and can make plays outside of it, that brings so much value and has such an impact on literally every single position of the team.
Yeah, absolutely. Tej and I talked about last time kind of the we went way deep into the quarterbacks. You guys can go back and find that one and listen to it if you want the specifics there. But generally kind of talked about this hierarchy, like sacks to pressure ratio really, really translates well from college to NFL. And it's kind of the idea of like, there's these filters of what makes a good NFL quarterback. And you're like, in college, can you hit wide open receivers? In college, that's not true for everyone, right? Like there are some guys who have different skill sets in that. And then it's, can you put the ball into a tight window when it's contested? And then it's, can you stand up in the face of pressure and put the ball into a reasonably tight window? And then the last filter is, can you escape pressure, extend the play, and create under pressure? You think about Pat Mahomes being so good in college was they had a lot of fast receivers. He was able to elude a lot of pressure, and then he has a great arm and great touch and was able to kind of create there. And so you're kind of seeing that hierarchy that does put so much stress on the defense. Thinking specifically about the draft and turning our attention a little bit more towards the type of players that are selected, I think that there's a couple shifts that really affect what a team is looking for. And like last year, we saw some picks early in the first round that weren't necessarily head scratchers, but were not the conventionally mocked picks for who was going to be the most important player and who teams were going to take. I think the athleticism has a lot to do with determining how these teams are approaching these early picks.
I think that, and from that, really, we're understanding that, hey, especially at the top of the draft, sometimes you are betting on traits, right, at the quarterback position, but also, I mean, for example, for the Jaguars last year with that first overall pick, because if you understand, hey, we can mold this player, we can do a lot here, there's stuff that you just can't teach in football, right? As much as I always harp on, coaching specifically, again, Mike Tomlin, I keep thinking of that quote because he, I think, is a great coach and thinking, well, we can teach, hand placement, or a player can really work on that in the offseason. There's some high level traits that you just can't teach. And there is such a value if you just hit on that, right? Even if the first overall pick, based on their salary, their surplus value, if Trayvon Walker is a huge hit for the Jaguars, that is really, really big at such a key position. And I think that really influences, sometimes it's just worth it to take that gamble, right? It is, again, it's a lot of times an unteachable thing to be the 99th percentile within the 99th percentile. So that's why I'm going to mention my guy, Anthony Richardson, again. Like, I just keep falling in love with the idea of, there's certain things that you can't teach, right? I think that, I think it may have been Shane Steichen today in his interviews, his position was, hey, we can teach accuracy, right? How much you believe that, plus or minus, but, sometimes, things that these guys do on tape, you just don't have that from every single player. So understanding this is a risk that we're going to take, but understanding the home run that you can hit off that is so huge. That can really, really kind of change a defense or change an offense.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that so the smart NFL teams obviously I think are adapting, and not to say there's kind of a hierarchy, but more of a continuum of the strategy of kind of how teams are approaching this. Do you think we're seeing less of, for instance, the Raiders had a pretty good streak of just taking the fastest guy available, right? And just got these burner wide receivers and didn't pan out for a variety of reasons. Don't want to peg that on any individual or any strategy, but do you think we're seeing less of that? Do you think that there are opportunities for teams to kind of um, zig and go back to, hey, I'm just going to take the most athletic raw guy? Yeah, how do you think the trends are shaping up there?
Yeah, I think at the wide receiver position, it felt like when Tyreek Hill really kind of came onto the scene, everyone was trying to fill that in some sort of way. And I think it may have taken a little bit of time for everyone to understand, wait, Tyreek Hill is actually like an incredible route runner and like can really catch in space. And it is not just this guy is literally, world class fast. I think Howie Rosen spoke about it a little bit, that I think the beauty for the job of the GM and the team managers now, or the team kind of molders, is you can find market inefficiencies in different ways, right? I think that, before Pete Carroll, right, he's drafting these kind of bigger cornerbacks, but that's kind of those were later round picks, right? And then when everyone, I think, adapts to that and changes in a certain direction, then you think, okay, well, where do we go next? I do think, the first round, that's the time when you're betting on traits, especially, I think at the quarterback position after you see enough. But to me, the GM, or again, team builders, they have to be able to think really hard and find, well, this is the trend of the league, right? Parker, I can't tell you how many times I've said the words too high, right? In some different form, right? Written, video, or podcast, right? So from that, now we have to be able to understand, okay, well, if we're moving to certain body types, what kind of players are we really going to be able to find, right? Maybe it's that because, yak receivers get so much more value, some of those, bigger guys like DK Metcalf, where maybe they're just not as shifty numbers wise as other guys, like that is a person that we can turn to. So it's, it's definitely something where I think that is something that general managers, you need to sit down, understand where the trends of the league are, because that's the way that you find, Bill Belichick talking about all the different, I think, market inefficiencies that he's able to exploit, and then, more teams going forward. But traits, if you want to bet on one thing, it's betting on people betting on traits for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, all this is couched in the idea that like people are doing their research coming to the draft, and while there's choices that you can criticize or whatever, no one's just walking in. There's not really that much low hanging fruit in terms of, oh, just draft like this, and if you don't, you're not smart. I mean, we think about things like, hey, first round in we look at Bijan Robinson this year. He's a very good running back. And the way your roster needs to be built is that the kind of resources you want to devote to the production you're going to get out of a running back relative to what you could get on the free market. And so there's questions about that, but generally this idea of, their strategy and their thought behind this, not to say that there's any kind of, this is obvious and fix this going into the draft. But I do think that, realistically, the athleticism is ever going to go away. There's just going to be this temptation to say, wow, that guy's a freak. I want him on my team. I love looking at, for instance, the Eagles with the kind of duality of wide receivers they have in Devonta Smith and in AJ Brown. That idea of like, we know the types we're going to go pursue, one of them through the draft, one of them through trades, and say, we want to get these two guys to fit in our offense. And I do think it's interesting that there is not just a, hey, if you draft the fastest guy, you're gonna win. If you draft the biggest running back, you're going to have the best yards after contact. There's so much more that goes into it. It's a sliding scale. And I think that's what's really hard about the draft, is not necessarily that it's an optimization problem. It's an optimization problem with unknown constraints, right? You have 11 guys on each side of the field. You can only play so many of them at a time. You can only play them in a certain way. And their execution ex ante is uncertain. We don't know how well they're going to execute. And so all you can do is set up for the best and kind of hope it falls into place with your execution and with your coaching. And so definitely hard to kind of put all those pieces together. I know that's hard hitting analysis to say the draft is a hard problem, but it's just kind of fascinating how difficult it is. It's not just a ranked choice selection, right?
Yeah, it's I like that you brought up the kind of Eagles receivers. I think that seeing how different teams, and really I think that football Twitter in general, sees different position groups being kind of created different ways, right? We think of the Chiefs cornerback room, for example, where, that's a lot of people in that room. The Eagles wide receiver room, where, hey, you need to have two good guys. Of course, right? We want to have good guys at every single position, right? That goes across the board. no doubt. But understanding, like maybe with how the Chiefs built their receivers, where you have players, playing in different roles. And I think as the league continues to say, well, we need to pass the ball, right? Well, we're gonna win by passing the ball. Understanding, well, is it that maybe this receiver was a second receiver in college where, for example, at Ohio State, you have so many guys going into that program who, I think that they're really technically savvy. And I think those coaches do a good job with those receivers and understanding, well, maybe this guy wasn't a one in college because there were so many good guys there, but a player like Devonta Smith, who, Devonta Smith, I think was so fun to watch. It literally looks like when he ran routes, like he was taking like one or two less steps to get through his cuts. I don't know if he has, something special in his knees, it's ankle flexibility, or it's different things like that. Just, biomechanically that allows him to just be so special, for sure. And I got a lot of love for Devonta Smith for sure.
Yeah. I think there's a really great Steve Sarkisian clinic where he's like talking about Alabama, and he hypes up Smith and he hypes up Jalen Waddle and says just a lot of things that basically come down to, if I tried to do what they were doing, I would fail. So why would I set them up to do things that I can do? Like in the offense, he's like, I want them making cuts. I want them running when they're catching the ball and doing all this stuff. So yeah, absolutely fascinating. Okay. We've hit the de facto halfway mark here. And so I'm going to transition us here to a little more combine specific. Let's start generally. What types of players kind of stand to gain from the combine, right? You've seen there's some players opting for pro day. I think if you're at the top of the draft, there's really not a lot of reason for you to go to the combine and potentially ruin your stock. So I think that's a pretty clear shot, but what kinds and types of players kind of stand out as having potential to improve their stock at the draft?
Yeah, I think players specifically from maybe quote smaller schools, right? Like not Georgia, Alabama, and such, where they can really prove to people that are watching, and really again numbers wise, saying, look, I can stick with this group, right? Unfortunately, it's sometimes maybe like there's a cutoff for the 40 where it's like, all right, well, if this player, from this school is outside of this mark. But I think of the story, I think it was Adam Thielen who ran like 4.5 or something at a regional combine, and that's what I think started to get people to think like, okay, well, this guy, he is that fast, right? Because it's sometimes hard to understand and translate. Well, what is production based on specifically? I know as much college as you watch, the level of competition is not the same week to week, right? So, if you put 300 yards up against a certain team, it may not look the same as putting up literally 70 or 80 yards. So getting to look at players side by side and saying, well, I know that, this receiver is the best, or I think that this receiver is the best route runner in the class. How does another player match up, right? So I think that players that find themselves at the next level, maybe, it's a player that just kills the 40 and they found themselves a role on special teams for, the rest of their career, really, and able to build a career off of that. But of course, Parker, we can't get away without talking about quarterbacks. I think that recently we found out, right, Anthony Richardson's going to be throwing. It sounds like, I guess alphabetically, CJ Stroud is next. So we'll be able to watch them throw kind of back and forth. And I think that, unfortunately, right, we build a lot of different narratives about players outside of just kind of their talent on the field. And, if there are teams that have, significant concerns about whatever Bryce Young weighs at the combine, for example, instead of looking at his tape, then that's an opportunity for quarterbacks to kind of stick in there. Specifically, I think Richardson and Stroud. And then Will Levi is an interesting example where if you have players that, maybe teams are, okay, well, what is your medical showing, right? Like, are you able to, is your hamstring injury, is it recovered? So I think people that are at full strength now, and maybe they have the ability to kind of clear up some concerns because, combine is such a huge way to get all these kind of medicals kind of standardized and together. But even within that, teams have different teams to look at it. So I really think of players that, they maybe want to show, hey, I can compete, on a numbers wise at this level. And then teams that are kind of are players that are clearing up specifically injury concerns.
Yeah, let's about quarterbacks. Let me be cynical for a second. I'm going to play devil's advocate and say quarterbacks wearing shorts, no pressure, no contact, no clock management, no running up and down the field to reset to get the play in, no sweating. If you're, thinking about Anthony Richardson playing in Florida, definitely a little bit different environment. Florida in August and Indianapolis in March are certainly different temperatures. What's the benefit of watching a quarterback throw at the combine if, so much of this does not directly translate to games, and how much of the combine throwing really is just kind of eye candy and, oh, it's cool, he can do that in shorts.
Parker, that's such a great point because, yeah, when I was articulating, well, what can a quarterback gain? Not that is the best way to evaluate, right? I'm just thinking of when Anthony Richardson gets on that field and lets one loose. I think he does have, decent.
Oh, I'm going to retweet it. I can see the clip. I'm going to retweet it. It's going to be awesome. Yeah.
Every year, and then when it gets to pro day time, you see the quarterbacks kind of going against their body and just letting it rip. And I think that it is really incumbent on teams to understand, that can't be the decider, right? The hope is that at that point, you've done a good job evaluating. Now, something maybe, if we have concerns about, for example, how much Anthony Richardson, how his feet work in the pocket, right? Whether they're just too close, is that something where we've seen him being conscious about that, seeing him working on that a little bit, whether it's maybe talking in an interview, right? And seeing, hey, Rich, what is your process been? What do you think your weaknesses are? And just kind of getting their head on that. Again, I do think, it is significant eye candy. It helps us get through the months of March on the football calendar for sure. And it is really a trap, I think, for teams, but it's an opportunity, I think. And I like that Richardson is going to end up throwing, because it's an opportunity for him. Hey, let me find a way to clear. But I would agree with you. It is not the best way to evaluate. I can't pretend. I'm not going to pretend okay, this is how teams are evaluating it. I do think, though, that, we fall in love with traits. We were talking about that earlier. And it is really easy to kind of do that with the quarterback position, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I do love the clips, man. I love a quarterback just rolling out and just chucking it, knowing that it really doesn't matter that much. It's still very aesthetically pleasing. I think that I have two more position groups that I kind of want to ask you about and talk about. And then we can cover anything else we've missed in our, I know I bounced around our notes. We did all this preparation and I'm just kind of all over the place, but there's two positions I want to look at, because specifically I think about the combine in terms of maybe creating some separation for log jams, because you get to see these players kind of next to each other. And so two positions that I'm really interested in. One, I've got tight end. You've got Dalton Kincaid from Utah. You've got Michael Mayer from Notre Dame, two both very, very productive wide receivers. Both are tight ends. Both are right kind of in that turn of the first round ranking on big boards, depending on where you look, and expected draft position and all of that. And looking at, Kevin Cole's research talking about for tight ends, that size, 40, and shuttle are really the three that matter, which to me is, I think if you asked me what are the most important drills for tight end, I think I could have told you that. But the question I want to frame this to you as is, with the kind of schematic shifts in the role of a tight end as becoming a hybrid receiver and less of a, every down blocking and then sometimes running a route guy, what can these tight ends do to kind of demonstrate their athleticism? What might be required of a tight end in the draft by NFL teams this year, as opposed to 5, 6, 10 years ago?
Yeah, that's a really good kind of thought. And I think that the easiest parallel I have to the pros versus is my guy, TJ Hawkinson, just because the Vikings were in a situation this year where, they really needed to have, an intermediate level threat. And so they moved to the tight end position, where tight ends, specifically, there's a value kind of maybe inefficiency where you can get more out of a tight end who can play kind of like a receiver. And to that end, I think that there's some cutoff where it's tight ends that are kind of producing at certain levels, 4.6, kind of that range is not a strict cutoff, but that's where kind of that spot you want to get to, because that will show if we want our tight end to act like a receiver, he's got to have the vertical ability of those wide receivers, right? And just being able to show that athleticism in different ways, is it the way that they run their routes, right? And so since the NFL is asking more of their tight ends in the passing game, unfortunately, those tight ends sometimes, maybe it is that, unfortunately, these guys got to spend a few months slimming down, if that is something that helps them get a little bit more athletic. Or, I do really think that to be good at the three cone means that you're good at the three cone, right? That is, a skill of itself. And other things, of course, that translate in different ways, and athleticism and agility, yes, but, really focus on being able to highlight that if that's something that you think is going to kind of show out in the draft and really be able to separate you. So I think that, unfortunately, I don't love it, but getting to that kind of certain 40-yard dash cutoff just to really put in people's minds where, again, hopefully it's already on tape, but look, I can threaten the defense vertically the same way that a receiver can. So my skill set is unique and should be considered in that way. Because again, if a tight end, tight ends are so much fun on offense because, you can move a gap when you're pulling or sliding them across the offensive line in the run game, being able to get them specifically matched up on that weak side linebacker that I talked about on the other side earlier. A tight end that can do that opens up a lot. Of course, we think about it traditionally as, the tight end is a safety blanket for a rookie quarterback, but really tight ends do so much more than that. And then, you can't just draft the guy from Iowa, unfortunately, every single year. But I think that those two guys at the top do look pretty good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm interested. I was pulling up the 40 times because I think there is like a really nice cutoff at about 4.5, 4.52, where after that it's like, oh, the tight end becomes a lot more uncertain as to a role. So you look at like Evan Ingram, 4.42, 40, Kyle Pitts, 4.48, Albert O, 4.49, Noah Fant, 4.5. Fleener is 4.51, OJ Howard's 4.51, George Kittle is 4.52, Jimmy Graham 4.53, and then it starts getting a little, the names are a little more make me think of random college plays and college games a little bit more once you get past that 4.5. Absolutely. Okay, similar question for tackles. And again, not to put you on the spot about specific players, but to say for tackle, athleticism, like you mentioned, tackles are playing cornerback where ends are playing or rushers are playing wide receiver. And there's kind of this athleticism dance. Kevin Cole found that 40 time correlation for the correlation between 40 time and draft pick for offensive tackles was almost as strong as it was for wide receivers, which is crazy to me. And then obviously the 20-yard cone or the 20-yard shuttle and the 3 cone are really high predictors of success as well. You have another logjam with tackles here in round 1, kind of this Paris Johnson, Peter Skoronski, Broderick Jones, Anton Harrison maybe flirting in there from Oklahoma. And so you've got these guys here. They go to the combine. How much can a combine really change the opinion of the left tackle? A guy that a team is going to try to build around on the offensive line and kind of say is the anchor.
Yeah. So hopefully not a lot, right? It shouldn't be able to change it a ton. My concern is that I think teams like Rashawn Slater was an example where maybe it's just us on the outside, but you see a player and, their arms don't, they can't touch the floor with their fingers standing up. So this person has to be a guard, right? I don't want people to think about that, specifically with Skoronski, right? Like just because a player's arms are quote shorter does not mean that they're an interior offensive lineman. There's so much more to that. And I think that my difficulty with thinking about, well, what at the combine is going to show you the best thing for a tackle, for example, right? That is so hard because it is, again, that's like such an art. It's so much about, well, how fast is really, like Lane Johnson is a great example where it looks like he is getting like his, second and third step in the ground before the defensive end already gets in the step, right? And he gets so far vertical when he sets, right? Just back into the backfield. He makes his quarterback's life a lot easier. And it seems like he's almost like playing on fast forward, but under obviously total control. So, well, do we have any drills that do that? Like maybe not, right? Do we have drills that kind of show, well, this person understands like the real battle of the hand placement, right? And I think you see, of course, Trent Williams is an easy person to kind of point to where he's like fake jabbing and kind of bring the defensive in. And really, it's of course such a physical battle, but is such a kind of mental battle. So I think maybe, you get in an interview with the tackle and ask him and kind of have them talk through and articulate, well, what is your plan against certain pass rushers? I think that is something fun, but I don't know. I just can't get behind it too much where I think that maybe if we can do a better job kind of biometrically tracking, well, this person has, like really good trunk movement, or this person has the ability to like keep his hands inside at certain times and really get kind of quick jabs where, well, how are we measuring quick hands and quick feet? Where, maybe is it 3 cone? Is it the shuttle or something like that? And then I wonder how much the 40-yard dash is. Well, all right, well, the guys who are really exploding out of their stance, or maybe we look at certain parts of the 40-yard dash where the same things for cornerbacks, maybe you look at the last 20 yards, maybe for offensive linemen, you're looking at the first 10 yards. But, my hope is that I believe that all these guys, they can improve their skills and get better in different ways. But I hope that not too much is taken away, from the combine. And these guys are just able to continue to do their work on their craft as they get to the NFL.
Short of glaring disparities in verified measurements, a tackle saying they're 6'6", 380 coming in at 6'2", 240 or something obscene. I think that, if the combine dramatically changes your opinion of a player, not at the margin, that probably says a lot about your scouting process beforehand than it does necessarily that player. I don't think that's unfair to say. And again, I can't off the top of my head think of an example where someone went to the combine and dropped, 5 rounds because they had a bad day or whatever. Okay, looking at we've talked a lot about the shifts. We've talked a lot about the athleticism and kind of where the changes happen. And I think you just beautifully segued into something that I want to ask to kind of have our concluding question here. I won't make you answer it for every position, but I'll say off the top of your head, as we're thinking about potentially let's improve the combine. Let's make it a more accurate measurement of kind of future success. What are a couple of drills you would like to see at the combine that might help you get a better signal as to not just the raw athletic quality, but the football athletic quality of some of these draft prospects? Think again, defensive end from Central Michigan. How can you convince me that I should draft you at the combine? What does he need?
Yeah, that again, Parker, that is a tough question, right? I think that there's a lot of different reasons why, the heads of the NFLPA are trying to do away with the combine. I wonder again, how football specific can we get with it? Whether it's, I don't know, I was thinking about this earlier, like, is it lame to just have like a tackle in a stance and literally just do his first two steps, right? His first, that reach and then kind of getting that anchor in, like, can we measure how much impact they're doing then? And then can we, instead of having it be just a bench press where we can measure and use different things to get like the force that is created by just a punch from them, which I understand, I'm sure those things are correlated, right? But some players are able to do it, I think, in better ways, in a more functional way, as opposed to just kind of the testing environment. So I think that it's maybe taking the drills that are already happening, particularly like the football, like the running a route and doing that, and then getting tracking data based off of those things. I think something that's been so cool at Sumer is seeing and understanding how you can use tracking data while understanding scheme and understanding, well, this is what a player is being asked, to use that together to get a really, really a good measurement, and to me, a better measurement in a lot of ways. So I would love to see, an offensive tackle get into a stance, just fire off, and then let's track off of that, right? And again, it's not the perfect way. I think that these players do a better job to do it is just based off of film. The same way with a receiver, right? Like, can we just do a little bit better job of tracking them instead of having them, I don't think you spend too much time in the NFL running a straight line, moving your head left and right. I do think there is a lot of stuff to be gained from that. But again, getting tracking data off of football specific things, like literally running a route, right? I think for quarterbacks, that's a little different, right? It's, one of my concerns for quarterbacks is, you don't have the relationship with the receiver. Your footwork's different. The way that they run the route is different than the guy that you've been running the route the whole entire time. But then that also highlights, hey, we need to be able to do a good job of getting tracking data based off of when these guys were playing too. So just a massive punt for that one on my end, just because, Parker, I'm not really sure, like, I'm not sure if you have any good ideas or kind of things or different ways. How do we, maybe get a little bit more of this spectacle?
Oh, well, no, I'm very glad for the nuanced answer, as opposed to you saying, I want to see lineman sumo wrestle or something absurd just to have an answer. So that's great. Yeah. Matt, you in the comments said we aren't using tracking data at the combine yet. Sheesh. And I agree. I think a distinction, I actually don't know if they have lasers on guys at the combine physically. I mean, they're doing splits on the 40. There's some computer vision going with the tracking and the comparison. So it's definitely being incorporated. What Shawn's talking about there is tracking data from on-field college games, looking at how these guys are moving in games and then in football simulated movements, which they're definitely not doing at the combine right now. So not to say that they're not using any kind of computer vision or laser tracking or anything fancy at the combine, but to say that there are definitely gains to be made there. Shawn, what a fruitful and interesting conversation. And again, I think if I had to talk about the combine, this is what I would want to do, it is talk about the shape and the structure and the form, unless, hey, do I think this guy's going to run a 4.25 or a 4.26 or, kind of the granularity of the performance there. Anything else that you want to touch on about the combine? Anything off our planning notes that I missed that you want to talk about? Just
briefly, I think the interview process is something that interests me. I think a lot of the story of Kawhi Leonard, right? He's in the suit. He's, apparently he was like sweating through the suit, and then the team ended up not picking him or picking him till later. And obviously, it works out at the extremes when you have, likely future Hall of Famer that maybe is not the best interview in the world. But thinking about, Justin Herbert is an example to me where, of course, he's still drafted high, but a player where maybe he's like, the way that this player leads is different than what we kind of stereotypically think about. So I get concerned sometimes thinking, well, I think when Thomas was talking about it a little bit on the show earlier this week is, you can use it as a way to kind of cross off people at certain points. And, I want to make sure that, teams, hopefully they have an open mind and understand, well, this player not interviewing great is not an indication that this player is not great at football, right? There are, of course, different things you can pick up. And when you're trying to make, the 0.001 difference between players that are maybe kind of grouped together is similar, maybe it is, how they answer a question, but to me, seeing thought process, right? I think that's something that's important, where you can use these interviews where I think every year a story comes out of a player that's gone through 32 interviews and they talk about, this team like asked this specific question kind of in this specific way. I think that, even as teams kind of send less personnel to the combine, understanding, well, are we using the interview to confirm our biases? What are we really using this interview for? And kind of how are we getting that information, from the player, and what are we using that for? I think that's something that I would love to, maybe talk to Thomas offline about, and then just interested to see what kind of comes out this year of kind of the weird ways that players are getting interviewed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about, I'm totally blanking right now, the Northwestern tackle from a couple years ago. Do you have his name off the top of your head?
You're talking about Slater, are you?
I know. I think I am talking about Slater.
Yeah.
You mentioned his name earlier, and maybe I thought that's not him, but that is him. There was the clip, and I even forget who it's with, but they were just like, "Hey, break down this. Here's a play, and just break it down." And I thought like the 15, 20 seconds of him just drawing it and be like, "All right, this guy's doing this was so much more enlightening than like how fast he could run a 40. I think the interview process is so interesting, and probably the NFL teams really do as well relative to the athletic endeavors that are happening under the combine. Oh, that being said, I think we've covered about everything that we wanted to cover. This is a great conversation. Shawn, thanks for joining us. People can find you on Twitter, linked you in the bio at Syed Schemes. Make sure you're following Shawn. He's doing some great work for Sumer as well, and some stuff that is behind the scenes, but also some stuff that's going to be front facing that you'll see that's really great to watch out for on our new website. Make sure you're following Sumer Sports on all the socials, on the YouTube, podcasts, wherever you can get those, and continue to get great content. I'm sure on Monday, Eric and Thomas will have just, all sorts of comments and thoughts about the retrospective of the combine and the quarterbacks and everything. Until then, thanks for listening. Appreciate you guys being in here. And we'll catch you next time.
Appreciate it, Parker.